It's the Security Weekly News, episode 338. I'm Doug White. Welcome to the week of 29 October 2023 on Halloween, the 31st of October. We got Doctor Who, iLeakage, Canada, AI, Killnet, NuGet, you might be a North Korean, and more news along with Jason Wood on this Halloween edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News. AI, accelerated cloud adoption, and hybrid work are fundamentally shifting how business gets done. The old way of securing your people, apps, and data doesn't work and scale anymore. To stay ahead, today's organizations need to reimagine their security and networking infrastructure with a cloud-first, unified SASE architecture. Join Palo Alto Networks and leading technologists from across the globe for SASE Converge 2023, a two-day virtual experience, November 15th and 16th. Revealing how SASE powered by advanced AI can drive better security and networking outcomes. Register today at securityweekly.com/Palo Alto. Well, welcome to the Security Weekly News and happy Halloween in the United States. It's that evening once a year when it's okay to dress as a slutty skeleton or a naughty chartered accountant. The nights you can drink Fireball at watching your kids terrorize the neighbors and old people huddle by the television worried about hopheads and freaks putting weed in the Milky Ways. It's a night when kids eat a lot of candy and then hurl in Technicolor before asking if there are any more of those Reese's Pieces. And, you know, I remember putting on a very flammable costume, kind of like this one, and then walking around with a bunch of smokers while your pants and shoes got soaked, and that old lady up the circle gave everyone religious literature warning about the danger of worshiping pumpkins and taking drugs. Oh, the good old days. Of course, for all our pagan friends, happy SWN and a good harvest. I think I'm going as an Amish rock star, or maybe that guy named Steve that was on the one train that was peeing in the corner before you just decided to maybe get off at the next stop and catch the next train kind of thing. So I didn't put a lot of effort into it, just grabbed some stuff that was laying around, you know, that kind of stuff. All right. Well, this one's kind of a pip to me. I like all these academic things, as you might guess, but the attack is called iLeakage, and I don't know if that's a play on words or not. I know it's a play on Apple, but, you know, iLeakage, like, oh, you know, kind of stuff. But it's described as a side channel attack that exploits Safari to steal sensitive information from Macs, iPhones, and iPads. Now, anytime I see side channel, I'm not in any way saying that's not a valid attack, but those are often very esoteric. But this attack is called a timerless speculative execution attack. Now, if you've forgotten what that is because it hasn't been mentioned in a bit, well, basically what it is it came from this Spectre problem, which is talking about how CPUs try to predict what they need to do next. What is the next branch? And then go ahead and load that stuff. So it's sort of a read-ahead buffering kind of problem. And there were some issues with how that was managed and so forth and what could be stolen out of there. There was not a lot of details in the article about exactly how it works, but there is a link to the academic article if you're interested. But if the CPU realizes it mispredicted, then it has to revert all the changes back that were performed after the prediction. So it's a sort of pretend it never happened, like I did with my Kelno, the naughty wood nymph costume. Yeah, they didn't like that one down at the school. But so they have to lure you to the malicious website. So in the end, it sort of starts with this. So they're luring you to a website which is capable of automatically opening some pages. So the malware then can open a page and they steal the information from that page. So it's basically getting Safari to load something and then pull the information out of Safari in this leakage process. The rendering process is just what actually puts everything up on the screen you're looking at all the time, because it's really more like stop motion animation if you actually look at the code. You know, it's just kind of a constant buffer and an update, buffer, update. But that's handling both these sites at the same time. And I guess basically the attack then causes it to leak some information out of that. Like I said, there's a lot of grim detail if you want to go read the academic article. But the attack was shown to be able to obtain passwords and other sensitive information out of Safari. The research was published by 3 separate universities, which usually just means it was 3 people who probably knew each other in grad school who now work at different universities. But regardless, there was no evidence that this had been used in the wild, and it only supposedly impacted Safari. But they said that on iOS, which would be the iPhone stuff, and Macs, I guess, it works on all the other browsers since they're apparently just wrappers in Safari. So that means if you're running Chrome, it's really just Safari with a Chrome wrapper on it. There was no guidance on what to do about this, but, basically avoid strange links that get sent to you by academics, maybe? I'm not sure. I avoid that anyway, especially ones that come from, people that are supposedly my boss. Canada banned WeChat and Kaspersky on Monday from all government smartphones. So be careful, because I saw some headlines about this, and they said Canada bans WeChat and Kaspersky, but they didn't ban it from you using it unless you're a government employee and you have a government-issued smartphone. They said this was due to privacy and security risk. Well, duh. WeChat is based in China, and Kaspersky is based in Russia. Yeah. The statement said that the CIO determined the apps present an unacceptable level of risk to privacy and security. Well, again, okay, pretty obvious. They did say they had not detected any breaches, but that the platform's data collection methods on mobile devices provided considerable access to the device's content. And of course, maybe you wouldn't even know if they had been gathering information. The Canadian government did ban TikTok as well back in February, and again, just from government devices, which makes a lot of sense. So just to restate, this is a ban on government devices, not the general public. I mean, I personally would not put TikTok, WeChat, and Kaspersky or much of anything on my smartphone anyway. I have friends who are always like, how do I remove an app? Because I've got so many. I'm like, well, just wait. The Russians will tell you later. But, you be you. It's fine. I mean, maybe if there's something you really want. What I always did was load them on old iPhones. I mean, I have, iPhones that I don't use anymore, and I use those to load up something. So if you just have to play that game that's called, Ukrainian invasion or something, you might want to think about that a little carefully. Put fake info into that one. Like, I always use the name Harry Molo for all my fake phones, but that's for you, John. I know you're not with us anymore, but, this is the day of the year when I can probably speak to all my dead friends. United States President Joe Biden issued an executive order about AI on Monday that focuses on sharing red team test results, establishes a program to find tools and fix vulnerabilities in AI code, and protects consumers against fraud and build up the AI workforce. So this was another in a series of executive orders that Joe Biden has issued on this. I presume all that means, more workers in AI, not AI replacement workers, but hey, you never know. And if you don't know, in the United States, executive orders are how we have to govern now, because the Congress can't seem to do anything because, basically if one side says we need this, the other side says no, we don't, even if it's like something obvious. And back and forth, and so they get nothing done, and so forth. But the president, and a lot of people, even in the U.S., don't know this. The president can just write these decrees called executive orders, and they stay in place forever. The only way to remove them is with another executive order. I mean, they can write them where they say they expire after a certain time, but they don't have to. They're pretty weird. But anyway, President Biden spent quite a lot of ammo on AI this year and has set up all kinds of working groups at NIST and so forth. And I think it's a good thing that they're trying to get out in front of it to see more focus made on being what we should do about AI rather than, 80-point headlines that say things like AI wolf boy found living in subway. Congress votes to censure the other side for providing the story and so forth. So it's good to see some movement in the U.S. We've seen movement in Europe, but it's good to see some movement in the U.S. Not just to say let's ban this or let's block this, but to actually try to start doing some information collection and data gathering about what does this all mean and what should we do about it going forward. So and before it even happened already. The threat group Killnet is now selling a distributed denial of service tool, which will make running these damn things easier. Thank you. Someone was running one against my subnet at home all weekend, and I never could figure out how to talk to someone at the ISP about it. It was so frustrating. Every time I kept trying to call, maybe I'd get somebody who'd let me talk to the security people, but nope. Every time it was like, have you rebooted your modem? Like, yes, my modem is fine. And, and I could send you the log to show you the attacks. And they're like, oh, we can't accept things like that, but we could send out a tech. And I was like, well, does the tech want to come look at the logs? And they're like, no, they come to test your equipment because it's probably your equipment. And I'm like, it's not my equipment. It's not. I'm telling you, it's not my equipment. I can show you the logs. I tested it. It's a denial of service attack. I can send you every piece of information to show you what's going on. And I just want you to put some rate limiting on my subnet. And they're like, well, we can send a tech out, but they will charge you $75 if it's not your equipment. I'm like, come on. I finally just waited it out, and I was like, I hate denial of service attacks. But anyway, this new tool can be rented for a day, a week, or a month, or just a weekend sometime when you're bored. But it basically is on the back end of reports that showed HTTP distributed denial of service attack increasing by 65% in the last 3 months. SOC Radar said they observed Killnet marketing the new digital denial or distributed denial of service tool on Telegram. And Killnet, if you aren't familiar with them, is a Russian-speaking gang who put the new tool together with another Russian-speaking actor called Combat OSINT. The tool is a precision targeting tool that is marketed as allegedly focusing efforts in unfriendly countries, because we all know that in Russia, if you're targeting enemies of the state, you can do whatever you want. Ease of use and flexible pricing models provide access to more attackers, so I guess we can expect this to keep increasing. And if you order before midnight, we'll throw in a free set of Ginsu knives signed by Larry Pesci. But regardless, all right. Malicious packages published to NuGet Package Manager have been uncovered by Reversing Labs. I don't know if you're supposed to say that as NuGet or NuGet. Like that stuff you buy in French gas stations. NuGet, they have like big chunks of it. My friend's always like, stop there, so we can get high modeling. But basically, Reversing Labs found this. They said the campaign has been ongoing since August 1st of this year and contains a large number of NuGet packages that were delivering Xerox and RAT. Reversing Labs said the attackers were very tenacious in getting these packages in the NuGet repository and continued to publish new malicious packages at an alarming rate. And, I guess that's how you get people to download it. But the packages, and there's a whole pile of them listed in the article, and they said this was just not even a full list of them. They were just, all over the place. But they often, like we usually see, imitate other popular packages using very similar names or, essentially typo squatting type stuff. And we've, of course, seen that on almost every repository out there. The malware exploits NuGet's MS Build integrations feature, which allows the implantation of malicious code on the victim, and a feature called inline task allow you to achieve code execution on the device. So really nasty. They got a rat. They can run code. You pretty much own your system. I'll be honest. I really try now to limit my use of repository libraries anymore. I used to be kind of a slob with it, and I just dumped in. I had like a template, and I just I was like, who cares? I'll just dump everything I always use in there, because who knows, I might want it later. But I've really gotten a lot pickier, and I've been trying to research the things that I'm adding and make sure that the names of those repositories are exactly correct. But if you have used any NuGet packages since August, you may want to review them and make sure that they're not on this list or that they're doing something you didn't expect. So you may want to take a look at that code as well. The United States and South Korean authorities have updated their guidance on how to avoid hiring a North Korean agent. The North Koreans have a pretty clever plan. They get people that work for the missile division to basically apply for jobs as freelance IT practitioners. And everybody needs them. And they work cheap. So, and if you aren't up on this, basically the North Korean agent then applies to you as a help desk tech or some other tech worker. You hire them remotely. And then they may, in some cases, they said they just do the work. I'm like, well, okay. What are you going to complain about? If you hire somebody, they do the work and you pay them. Well, what they do with the money is, their business. But, when these people often aren't paid, they're being paid by the government, and they give the money as hard currency to North Korea's missile program. And so, of course, sometimes they are actually doing espionage, stealing plans or planting malware in your system. The FBI had previously warned employers to watch for suspicious behaviors such as logging in from multiple IP addresses, odd hours, or inconsistencies in name spelling on different online platforms. The updated advice, which is called "You Might Be a North Korean Agent," actually, no, I made that part up. But the guidance that they just released said that these are characterized by repeated requests for prepayment, along with anger and aggression if this is denied. Like, boy, that's what you want to see in a new employee. I want my paycheck in advance, and I want it now. And if it's sort of the Karening of remote employees, I guess. They have threats to release proprietary source codes if additional payments are not made. Using freight forwarders address rather than a home address when they're shipping you a laptop or monitors or whatever they send you, or they change their address frequently. They evade in-person meetings, imagine that, and they also duck a request for drug tests. This could be just about anybody I know. They change their payment methods or accounts on freelance finder platforms and having multiple online profiles for the same identity with different pictures. So it's kind of like Tinder dating. I guess. But, I mean, you can obviously vet this. But the agencies went on to recommend some tech measures as well. I mean, basically, read that, look at those measures. But, I mean, really vet the people you hire thoroughly. I mean, a few simple web searches can help you start to go, really? Is this the person we want? They also recommended geolocating remote connections, blocking connections from commercial VPNs because that's how they're disguising where they're based in. And I mean, if you just hired a guy named Bob Anyang and Bob was mailed a laptop and given root access to the entire company, well, I mean, even if Bob is not an evil agent from North Korea, it's really a bad idea. The person's a remote worker you've never met, you've never seen, you have no idea if they're real or not, and they could be North Koreans or Chinese or Russian or who knows what, or it could just be some guy named Glenn in Georgia who's decided to harass your company. So maybe check these people out a little more thoroughly, and we saw that a lot in audit. People, they've not been checked out. We had all kinds of stuff. Probably worth a read. Well, I talked about this before, but it's a good redistributable story about scams that are targeting teens. I mean, you probably need to have this talk before you even have the other talk with your kids and your employees. I mean, there's a talk with the employees too, right? I mean, just because you're over 18 doesn't mean you aren't targeted. But the article definitely talks about how scams are focusing more and more on younger and younger users. And the whole don't let them on the internet is about like that. Don't, tell them not to have sex and we won't have a sex talk and they won't do it. Right. Sure. You keep telling yourself that. But we all know how well all that works. So ignoring this is not a good idea. I'll leave the sex thing up to you. But on the scams, you really need to talk to your kids and your employees and your family members about these kind of scams. Like Discord groups are filled with all kinds of trolls. They're probably a lot of them are scammers. Some of them may be predators, and so on. And there is a link on here to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that has some lessons and tip sheets if you want to try and help you with this talk, especially if you're not expert on some of that. Most of you listening would be, but some people aren't. The article does have some good suggestions, but look. I did a case where this guy was literally terrorizing a bunch of kids who had grown into adults and terrorized them for years and years and years. I mean, like a decade, using their yearbook information and guessing things about them from their social media accounts so they could get it through their 3 questions. What's your favorite food? And, and I asked him, I was like, how do you guess that? And he was like, well, it's always pizza or spaghetti. And if it's not, I find their original cars and stuff in their yearbook. Just talk to your kids about this because we keep seeing it. It's very distressing for these young people and adult people at the same time. It is appalling, but it can happen to you. So keep that in mind. Take a look at this article. Well, he claims he was off on personal business, but I think it's pretty strange that I've never seen Spider-Man and him in the same room at the same time. Please welcome possible Spider-Man, Jason Wood.
Well, you never know what's going on in the multiverse and what's possible, right?
Everything is possible.
There you go. So the Register published an article yesterday about a report or findings on a research project that was conducted by Palo Alto Networks Unit 42. And in their blog post, they give a fairly detailed account of how they monitored for stolen AWS credentials. Now, the results of their research were pretty well summed up by the Register's headline. Cryptojackers steal AWS credentials from GitHub in 5 minutes. So there you go. Basically, it's happening, and it's happening pretty quick. But the blog post gives some really detailed information about how Unit 42 conducted the monitoring, which I also thought was worth talking about, because it was, I don't know, I just thought this was really cool, how they described what they were doing and the things they ran into and how they tried to get around the defenses, rudimentary as they may have been, from the attackers to try and avoid being monitored. So the researchers started the project with a fairly straightforward goal. What could they learn about leaked AWS IAM credentials and their use by threat actors? So they ran as part of this, they actually probably ran into multiple campaigns, but they did cover one campaign in specifically that they called Electra Leak. And the name Electra comes from the name of a Greek cloud nymph. And the use of the letters capital L, lowercase e, and k are the first 3 characters in the passwords that apparently were repeatedly used by the attackers, which, I find the different habits that the attacker groups or threat actor groups have, that's always something that I find to be a little bit fascinating. Because, in this case, it's just how they created their passwords were repetitive enough that allowed them to be fairly identifiable. Anyhow, the researchers noted they also found enough other indicators for them to assess that this campaign has been going on since at least December 2020. So we're coming up on 3 years here that this has been happening. This is a nice long-lived campaign. The attackers' campaign is fairly simple in concept. They monitor GitHub for new public repositories being published, and then they look for AWS keys. And once they find some keys, they collect them, do some reconnaissance on the AWS environment and account that the victim has, check the privileges they have, and then they start creating security groups and launching really pretty large EC2 instances where they then deploy a crypto miner where they're mining for Monero tokens. And they're just trying to grab as many of these as they can before they finally get shut down. The miners actually host the mining software and configuration on Google Drive. So they're using another cloud service out there to store the software and use it as deployment. And just drop a shell script on the EC2 instance. It does the download, changes permissions, executes, cleans up, and gets ready to go. Now, there are a few other bits of information about the attackers, which we'll cover as we go, but that's largely how their campaign works. They had to do the way Monero is set up. Everything's going to a single wallet address, and there's some more privacy implementations in Monero that allow it, makes it difficult to track some of the activity over time. But and it mines faster than things like Bitcoin, which would take forever at this point. What I did find to be unexpected in this report was really the amount of detail that they went into in how the researchers went about performing their monitoring and how they tried to hide the fact that, hey, we're trying to monitor you and keep an eye on the attackers. So they started off by explaining that one of the things the attackers would do is they would get IAM credentials, and then they would look for use that to examine the AWS account. And any AWS accounts that were repeat offenders kept showing up, started to get them a little bit worried about maybe they're deliberately leaking these credentials over and over again. So they would then block these accounts from being used in what appeared to be a way to avoid being monitored or tracked. Now, to get around this, the researchers created a tool named HoneyCloud to automate the creation of new and vulnerable AWS accounts with some, they call it semi-randomized changes to the infrastructure and the environment, basically trying to avoid looking like each other and being a cookie cutter. And it was all automated deployment type of stuff, so their code had to handle this randomization for them. And then they basically would create new public repositories on GitHub, commit the code with the IAM credentials leaked into it, and then immediately delete the code like they were trying to clean up from the repository, which of course leaves everything in the history. But they would just not have it part of the code base published. They would at least go to the step of trying to make it look like they tried to hide that. Now, initially, the researchers, and like I said, I just found all of that interesting because now as you start giving away information about how you're setting up your environments a bit, and the semi-randomized bit seems like an interesting thing to keep an eye out for. Initially, the researchers base64 encoded their credentials in their commits to see how the attackers would respond. But they actually didn't observe any credential theft or activities occurring around that. So, they basically determined that, okay, the attackers aren't finding them when they're base64 encoded. So they removed that encoding and they committed them in clear text. And it turns out that this is when things started happening. And the first group of people to detect that they have committed credentials in the clear is GitHub itself. And they talked about GitHub's secret scanning feature, which secret means as an encryption secret. It's not secret as in we don't talk about it like Fight Club or anything like that. But GitHub would detect the credentials and then immediately on an automated basis alert AWS. AWS says automation would then quarantine those credentials. So they're pushing the credentials over to limit what they're capable of doing. AWS is getting tired, I guess, of having these expensive VMs spun up for crypto mining and other shenanigans. So the quarantine, they said, was being implemented by AWS within 2 minutes of the initial commit. Not bad. So they let that go for a while, and they wanted to see, okay, what else do we get out of this? What if we remove this? What'll happen? So they decided to replace it with a very permissive policy. So they very deliberately removed this defense to see, what would happen once the attackers picked up the keys. And at least one instance, the attackers picked up the keys and began their reconnaissance within 4 minutes of AWS applying their modified, dumbed-down quarantine policy, because I guess they have to leave that policy in place. You can only change, but you can change the content of it. So if we stick to the time of 2 minutes of GitHub notifying AWS about it and having AWS apply the policy, then 4 minutes for the recon to begin, the attackers were basically on this account within 6 minutes of the commit, which is pretty dang fast. Obviously, lots of automation going on here. Now, I was surprised to see the amount of information about the researchers saying what they did. They really told, to me, a fair bit about their TTPs in performing this monitoring. They didn't release any specifics on what HoneyCloud was randomizing and what it wasn't. I did hunt around a little bit looking for the project, and I saw some blog posts referencing it, but it's not something that apparently they have committed to the public, at least that I found last night as I was looking at this. But if the actors are paying attention, then they were just told that they're being monitored and that the automation, again, is semi-random, which means, there's some similarities here. Where's the randomization occurring? That might start giving them something to look at to see if they can check for this type of looking over their shoulders to see what they're doing, if they even care about it, because they're being successful enough that maybe they don't even care at all. But, much like the attackers are using L, E, and K in their passwords, they probably have some habits in the HoneyCloud environments that could tip these attackers off. I did really enjoy reading about how the researchers went through this process, what their methodology was, how they stepped into this bit by bit, and just kind of make a change, watch and see what happens. Okay, we'll make another change, we'll see what happens again. Allow them to see what the attackers were doing at each stage of this before they, open things up completely and just really let the attackers run wild for a little bit. So, it was a good read, I think. Very nice research by the Unit 42 folks. So, worth taking a look at. Now, y'all missed today's story time with Doug as he described the horrors of orthopedic surgeries that he's witnessed. In fact, it sounded a little bit like some kind of Halloween special that, is going to keep you up at night. In fact, I think the production crew said they will be having nightmares for the rest of their lives due to what he described. But with that, let's go. His final story today is probably not quite that traumatic, but let's go back to Doug and see what he has for us.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, the last story is just about how it's strange that it's illegal to wear other people's skin, but no, I'm kidding. And finally, everybody hates the streaming wars, and I'm no exception. I mean, if you want to watch Doctor Who, well, it's not that simple. It should be, but it's not. I mean, so Disney Plus apparently bought someone that bought somebody else that owns something that ultimately gave them the rights to the new Doctor Who, including the upcoming, highly awaited, foaming at the mouth 60th anniversary episodes with Mr. Tennant, who is, and then of course they also have the 15th Doctor series with Ncuti Gatwa, which is coming up, and everybody's eagerly awaiting that. If you don't like Doctor Who, sorry, but I mean, so you subscribe to Disney Plus, but got it. But wait, if you want to watch the other modern Doctors, which is Doctors 9 through 13, well, you'll also need a subscription to Max because Disney Plus doesn't have those episodes of Doctor Who. They only have the newest ones. Now, and of course, if you're more of a Hartnell or Baker fan, the first and the fourth Doctor, respectively, or even if you like good old John Pertwee, well, that's still a no-go because you're going to need a subscription to BritBox in order to see those really old ones from that I used to watch when I was a kid on PBS. It's just kind of getting ridiculous, right? I mean, how long is it going to be before you start watching Mr. Fufu's Adventure in New Orleans, and after the first episode, you have to use a different service to get all the other episodes, or every other episode is on a different service, or, oh, wait, that one over there that has those ads where you have to watch 120 seconds of ads for every 2 minutes of program, and most of the ads seem to be in Tagalog, and they're for some kind of drug targeting saggy eyelids or something weird like that. One service to rule them all, one service to find them, one service to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Yes, I got that all out. Happy Halloween. Be safe out there. And that's the news. Thanks, Jason. And we'll see you Friday for the Security Weekly News.